White Manga here. From the previous lesson, we learned how to draw a human body for anime and manga typically with accurate proportions. And in this lesson, we'll go over the basics of how to draw hands and feet. Understand the basic shapes that form the hand, and then remember all the key things that you have to when drawing the hand. So we can start with a little square. Then break it down like so, where you have this coming in, and then you can just have it down. And this is starting to form what would be the forearm. If you continue this line, go back up. The thumb, we can imagine coming out from this point. You have all the fingers, a little bit of a mountain at the top, and then a connection right here. So it's almost understanding how the hand is going to look if it's placed in this position with this hand gesture and the fingers are close together in this way. You can then split it with 3 lines. And this tells you where everything needs to go. Now we can have a more organic approach, and depending on your art style, the way you hold the pen, it will then form everything you need. Key things to remember is the pinky is the smallest and thinnest finger, the thumb is the thickest finger, and the middle finger is usually the longest. Have the little bumps, making it organic, right? The thumb is usually facing outward, while depending on how you were looking at this hand, whether you're looking at the palm or the back of the hand, it's up to you. But the thumb is usually a little bit facing outward, and then we can have like the fingernail over there. Depending on your style, there are art styles out there where you don't even get to draw fingernails as much. Then, from here, you form almost like the drumstick part of the thumb. You have one end and then the other. And now, we're just making everything look a little bit more organic, where it actually looks like a hand. Keep in mind that if you want to be realistic, it doesn't just cut straight. It actually also forms a little bit of a mountain. So you have lines coming out like this. And each finger is split into 3 parts. This is still a bit stylized from reference and what you consider research. You can add a little bit and make some fingers a little longer, like they should be, and some smaller and shorter. In fact, they're not always connected completely, right? That's kind of unrealistic. There's always at least a little bit of a hole in between the fingers. Some space, some gap. Then you can have a little line that comes here. A bump for the wrist area, a little line to suggest some tendons, and this you can say is your attempt at a hand. Reduce the opacity. The opposite is true if we're looking at now, say, the back of the hand, where we get to see the fingernails. Essentially just doing the same thing. If you're stretching out the fingers, they're going to be straight out, but if you relax them, the more they do something close to this. Right, so understanding the fingers, understanding how they bend, what the joints are, all of that comes into play when mastering how to draw hands and hand gestures. The fingernail there is still facing outward, but this time, since it's the back of the hand, it'll be like more like so. And we can turn off the other drawings in the back so they don't distract us. Bump for the wrist, bump for the wrist. And then you form the forearm. You can have suggestive lines to show knuckles, and then suggestive lines to show fingernails. Up to you how you want to render this. Sometimes there are styles where you don't connect all the dots completely. You might even have shading just to suggest where it bends but that's not necessary, and that's up to your style. And that will be, again, another attempt at drawing a hand. Now remember, if the fingers were all straight out, the more relaxed they are, they tend to do something like this, right? If we have the thumb, even the thumb, right? And then the more you bend them, that's how they bend. That's too high. So it's good to keep that in mind as well. Well, before we start to bend and do closed fists and things of that nature, how about we spread the fingers apart? Kind of like, so. Reduce the opacity, if you will. And we'll do a new one this time. And usually, the core of the hand remains the same, for the most part. Because those don't bend, those don't move. What moves are the actual fingers. So the thumb moves in that direction, this moves in that direction. The middle finger usually stays the same, unlike the index. And then the other last two fingers, including the pinky, go in the opposite direction if you're spreading out the fingers. An example of this would be like so, right? So then we know the hand is going to be here. That's why we draw that curved line, just to let us know how tall the thumb is still going to be, and we don't have it be longer than it actually is. Same thing here. The parts at which the fingers pop out of is not going to change much. And then once you understand how to draw hands in this way, it'll help your whole full understanding of hands in any other way. Good practice would be to play around and bend your own actual hand. The fingers, how far can they extend, how far can they bend, and keep track of what you learn. And there you have it. Here, I think the thumb can actually bend even further. If you want it to. You can have some shading, which you will find a lot in some manga art styles and things of that nature. Sometimes the thumb can be even lower. Because what you will find is there's a lot of room for the thumb to bend, as there's a lot of space here. There's a lot of room to stretch and bend in that corner. Use the opacity of that. If you want to see the palm form of it, once you understand how all the fingers move, how the hands interact with one another, where all the joints are, it'll help your overall understanding of what to do when drawing hands. Now this is wide open. Again, if these are all the fingers, they close in like so. In a very inward way. So passing, create a new layer. If you wanted to draw a closed fist, what you don't want to do is have it all kind of be like this. Unless you're doing something really stylized. If you want something semi-realistic, in tune with the anime manga style of things, you're now folding all these fingers. You're going to have to think about the hands in 3D. First things first, where all the hands are actually coming from. In order for it to fold, right here from this angle, we don't get to see where all the fingers are coming out from, like so. But when the fist becomes clenched, we then see a little bit from the top, where all the fingers come out of. So as is right now, not this, it has a little bit of a curve to it, right? Going up and down. And in order to clench the fist, we see a little bit of it where the fingers are going to pop out of. So we'll see mostly this part of it, this part, and this part as it's kind of squeezing inwards. Again, I recommend looking at a lot of real-life images to help you understand how the hands fold exactly. But once you understand it on this basic level, it will help you understand better what you're looking at, whether it be real life or stylized. Now we know how these first fingers fold. The thumb coming in will block the middle finger and the index finger in some kind of way. It's up to you exactly how you want to do it. With practice, will allow you know where exactly to put some of those bumps for where the hand is going to fold, for how the hand folds and so on. So this is one way it could fold, and the fist will be clenched. Another is where maybe the fist is clenched in such a way all the fingers are a little bit in line. And the index finger might even look like it's really coming in. Again, it's really up to you. You can have some shading, which we'll touch on in a future lesson. But now if you want to see it flipped, you would have like so. The knuckles will be around here, and you just have little lines to suggest the knuckles. Understand the basics of feet. If we had the legs coming down like so, you have ankles. Keep in mind this is a little bump before we get to the knee area. Sometimes we might have a little bump here. The bumps are bigger depending on how muscular. Everything is kind of bigger and thicker depending on how muscular. But we're keeping it simple. A lot of this will come with time and your understanding of the human anatomy, with how the body parts relate with one another, proportions, and all of that. For feet, I always like to have a little bump, right? I always like to have a bump like so, because on the side, it's almost like the ankles. On the side, you have ankles like that, and then the feet kind of start to come down like that. You have a bump in the back, and then you connect. So when looking from the front, I always spread it apart and then pull it back together. Apart and then back together and then connect. And then you can have little lines to separate for all the toes. Similar thing here. You know where all the toes are going to be, and then you know the leg kind of goes back up. If we want to see from behind, again, keep track of the little bumps for the ankles, and then another bump, but this time maybe we're drawing from behind, and then it just ends, and we don't get to see what's in front as much because it's blocked. Depending on the camera angle, we might see a bump like that and a little bit of the toes. Or, still depending on the camera angle, it might be where you see the bumps underneath. I urge you to kind of feel out your own legs and know where all these things go. So if the camera angle is a little bit from underneath, then if you continue that, you can separate for the toes. There's usually like a line here. Again, you also understand better with anatomy in place. Now, if we reduce the opacity, then you can feel things out to get the proper leg. Okay, your bump here. Reduce the opacity even more. Here. Suggestive lines. And then you know where the toe is going to be. A little bump right here, so it kind of goes in and out, just to suggest where the toenail begins. And then you can have lines to suggest the toenails. The other bump. Sometimes you might see the side of the leg a little bit, but sometimes it's completely blocked out. And I have all these lines separating the toes because they kind of overlap. It's not going to be like this, unless that's the style you're going for. It's always going to be a little bit suggestive of maybe some joints and whatever. Sometimes it's subtle, sometimes it's not. And then you keep in mind of the obvious things. The biggest toe starts it out, and it just usually gets smaller and thinner. Occasionally, the next toe might be taller, but that's up to you. Go look at a lot of people's feet. There are all kinds of feet out there. Similar thing here. A line to suggest that ankle area. It's the bump, unless you want the character's foot to be completely flat. And then here. We don't get to see a lot of the other toes because they're blocked. Usually depends on you. Sometimes this bump is smaller. People come in all kinds of shapes, sizes, so you feel free to make adjustments where you see fit. Same thing here. Remember that bump right here? Because now we're looking from behind. But like maybe this is the pinky toe, the smallest toe, and then you just keep going. And then maybe you see a little bit of the front, but in some cases you won't. Similar thing here, where the leg is shown from underneath a bit. You have some suggestive lines to show that major bump that's like behind the ankles. And then we're figuring everything else out, keeping track of the bumps, the R, and then the space for the toes. If it feels like it's too much, because the toe should be the smallest, you make adjustments. And there you go. And over time, you'll be able to wing it yourself. You know where that bump is going to be. Maybe the leg is really bent down. You know what the bumps are, like I said. And so we're seeing the foot from underneath, a little bit of shading, but usually underneath there's like 2 bumps here, and that's what these are as well. Once you keep track of the bumps, then you can start forming the toes. And usually the one closer to the biggest toe is the bigger bump. Make adjustments where you see fit. And there you go. And eventually we'll get the opportunity to draw the foot, feet in more dynamic poses. Obviously you would have the same approach when drawing the other leg, keeping things symmetrical unless you want to make whatever changes you feel necessary. Today we learned to draw hands and feet for anime, manga, webtoon, the list goes on. And in the next lesson, we'll finally go over the basics for hair and clothes. See you there.